Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. There's a spot in the hallway where I always feel pressure at my back. It's not air, it's too dense, too warm. I tested it, faced the wall, stood still, then turned away quickly. Every time I felt something shift, like the wall had been moving just before I looked. Now I don't have to turn anymore. I hear it. A faint exhale, soft and humid, brushing the back of my neck. It only happens when I ignore it. The more I pretend not to notice, the louder it gets. And lately, I think it's breathing in. The paint on that section feels different when I run my fingers across it. Slightly warmer than the rest. There's a texture beneath the surface, like something is pressing outward from the other side. I've lived here for months, walked past this spot hundreds of times, but I only noticed it when I started working from home. The quiet made me more aware of things. Small things. The way shadows fall differently in that corner. How the air moves when there's no draft. I started documenting it. Simple notes at first. Times when I felt the pressure. When I heard the breathing. The pattern was inconsistent, unpredictable. But it was always there when I wasn't looking for it. The moment I focused on it, everything would stop. The wall would return to being just a wall. Cold, silent, normal. The breathing grew stronger, more pronounced. I could feel the moisture now, warm against my skin when I passed by. It reminded me of standing too close to someone in conversation. That intimate invasion of personal space. But there was no one there. Just me and the wall and something that shouldn't exist. I pressed my ear against the spot. The paint was definitely warmer. There was a rhythm beneath the surface, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat, but deeper, more primal. I stayed there for what felt like hours, listening. The rhythm matched my own pulse at first, then gradually began to slow. My breathing adjusted to follow it. In, out, in, out. The boundary between my breath and whatever was behind the wall began to blur. When I finally pulled away, there was a handprint on the wall. Not mine, larger. The fingers were too long, the palm too wide. It was pressed from the inside, as if someone had been pushing against the wall from the other side. The paint around it was cracked, peeling in thin strips like old skin. I took pictures. The camera captured nothing unusual, just a normal wall with normal paint. But I could still see the handprint, clear as daylight. still feel the warmth radiating from it. The breathing continued, now synchronized with my own heartbeat. Each exhale brought with it the scent of something organic, something alive. I tried to ignore it, walked faster past the spot, took different routes through the house, but the breathing followed me. I could hear it from other rooms now, soft and persistent. The moisture would appear on mirrors when I wasn't looking. Condensation that spelled out shapes I almost recognized, almost understood. The handprint began to change. Each day, it pressed deeper into the wall. The fingers spread wider. The palm grew more defined. Other shapes appeared around it. Footprints, the outline of a face, all pressing outward, straining against the thin barrier of paint and plaster. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. The wall was too close. Instead, I moved to the living room, but the breathing followed me there too. It was coming from all the walls now, a network of exhalations that created drafts where there should be none. The house felt alive, breathing, watching, waiting. I started recording everything. Voice memos, video files, hours of documentation. When I played them back, there was only silence, but I could still hear the breathing, still feel the pressure, still see the handprints multiplying across every surface. The wall in the hallway began to bulge. Subtle at first, just a slight curve where there should be flatness, but it grew more pronounced. The paint cracked further. Pieces fell to the floor like shed skin. Underneath, the wall was no longer white. It was pink, fleshy, pulsing with a life of its own. I touched it. The surface was warm and yielding. It gave slightly under pressure, like pressing into someone's palm. The breathing intensified. The moisture increased. The entire wall was sweating now, beads of clear liquid running down its surface. It tasted of salt when I caught a drop on my finger. The bulge grew larger, more defined. I could see the outline of ribs beneath the surface, the curve of a spine, the suggestion of limbs folded inward. Something was trying to emerge, had been trying for months. My presence, my attention, my documentation had somehow given it strength. I tried to leave, packed my things, headed for the door, but the breathing was everywhere now. The walls pulsed in unison. The handprints moved, fingers flexing, palms pressing harder. The house was exhaling around me. The air grew thick and humid. Each breath tasted of copper and earth. The front door wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door itself seemed fused to the frame. I pushed harder. The wood began to give, not outward, but inward, as if the door was becoming part of the wall, part of the breathing entity that had consumed my home. I turned back to the hallway. The wall was fully distended now. The shape beneath was almost human, almost recognizable. It was trying to speak, the breathing forming words I couldn't quite understand. The moisture on its surface traced patterns that looked like writing. Messages in a language I'd never learned, but somehow felt familiar. I approached it, placed my hand against the warm surface. The breathing stopped. Everything stopped. The silence was absolute. Then, slowly, the wall began to breathe in. The bulge started to flatten. The handprints began to fade, but I could feel myself being drawn forward. The suction was gentle but insistent. I pressed harder against the wall. It gave way beneath my touch. My hand sank into the surface. The flesh parted around my fingers. I could feel something on the other side, something that had been waiting, something that recognized me. The wall exhaled one final time. The sound was different now. It was my voice, my breathing, my exhalation mixing with whatever lived behind the surface. I tried to pull my hand back, but the wall held it tight. The flesh closed around my wrist, my forearm, my elbow. I stopped struggling. The breathing resumed, but now it was coming from me, through me. I was becoming part of the wall, part of the house, part of whatever had been waiting behind the surface all along. The handprint on the wall is gone now, but sometimes, when the light hits just right, I can see a new one forming. Smaller, more familiar. It's my hand pressed against the inside of the wall. And I'm breathing with the house now. Exhaling when no one is looking. Waiting for the next person to notice. To document. To feed whatever hungers behind the surface. The wall still exhales, but now it inhales too. And somewhere in between those breaths, I'm still here, still watching, still waiting for someone to turn away. Story 2. It started with a spoon, slightly different handle. A notch near the base I didn't remember. I assumed it was old, misplaced. But the next day, a glass appeared, clouded, thin-lipped, unfamiliar. Then a bowl, a cracked rim. One by one, the objects gathered on the same shelf. I never saw them arrive, only found them already clean, already placed. I checked the locks. Nothing broken. No one had entered, but something had, and it's building a set, a collection of things, not mine, yet somehow preparing for someone who might be. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not unpleasant, but wrong for my kitchen. Like wet earth mixed with something metallic. I opened the cupboard that morning to grab my usual coffee mug, and there it was, the spoon. Silver, but not the silver I owned. Heavier. The handle curved differently in my palm, and that small notch near the base felt deliberate, carved with intention. I held it up to the light streaming through my kitchen window. The metal reflected strangely, as if it had been polished with something other than ordinary cloth. I told myself it must have been there all along, mixed in with my other utensils. Memory plays tricks. We forget what we own, especially the small things. But the next morning, the glass appeared beside it. Thin glass, almost fragile, with a rim that felt sharp against my lips when I tested it. The surface was clouded, not with age, but with something that wouldn't wash away no matter how hard I scrubbed. I ran my finger along the inside, and it came away slightly damp, though the glass had been sitting dry in the cupboard. I started paying attention then. Really paying attention. Each morning, I would approach the cupboard with growing unease. The objects multiplied slowly, methodically. A bowl with a hairline crack running through its center. A fork with tines that bent at unusual angles. A plate so thin I could see my fingers through it when I held it to the light. Each piece felt foreign in my hands, like I was handling artifacts from someone else's life. I began documenting everything, taking photographs, writing descriptions, measuring dimensions. The objects seemed to follow no pattern I could understand, yet they formed a cohesive set. Colors that complemented each other in ways my own dishes never had. Shapes that nested together with perfect precision. The strangest part was how clean they were. Spotless, as if they'd been carefully washed and dried before being placed. No fingerprints, no water spots, no dust. They appeared ready for use, waiting for someone to claim them. I changed my locks, installed a security system, checked every window, every possible entry point. The recordings showed nothing. Empty kitchen, untouched cupboard. Then, suddenly, inexplicably, a new object would be there in the next frame. The camera never caught the transition, only the before and after. Sleep became difficult. I would lie awake listening to the subtle sounds of my house settling, but underneath those familiar creaks and sighs, I began to hear something else. A soft clinking, like dishes being gently arranged. When I crept to the kitchen to investigate, everything would be silent, still. The objects began to feel warm when I touched them. Not hot, but body temperature, as if they'd been recently handled. I started wearing gloves when I examined them, but even through the latex, I could feel that strange warmth radiating from the metal and ceramic. One morning, I discovered something that made my hands shake. Scratches on the inside of the cupboard door. Thin lines, barely visible, but definitely there. They formed letters, or what might have been letters in a language I didn't recognize. The wood around the scratches was slightly darker, as if stained by something other than age. I traced the marks with my finger, and for a moment I could swear I felt the wood pulse beneath my touch. A subtle vibration, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. I jerked my hand away and slammed the cupboard door shut. That night, I set up a camera inside the cupboard itself. A small, wireless device that would record everything. I sealed the doors with tape, creating an obvious sign of any intrusion. In the morning, the tape was intact, unbroken, but the camera was gone. In its place sat a teacup, delicate, with a pattern of vines around the rim. When I lifted it, I could smell something floral, as if it had recently held tea. The bottom was slightly warm, and when I turned it over, I saw an inscription etched into the porcelain. Not words, but symbols that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. I called in sick to work. I needed to understand what was happening. I spent the day researching, reading about similar phenomena, looking for any explanation that made sense. The internet offered theories about parallel dimensions, time slips, manifestations of psychological stress. Nothing felt right. As evening approached, I decided to stay awake all night. I positioned myself at the kitchen table with a clear view of the cupboard. I had coffee, snacks, a book to help me stay alert. I was determined to catch whatever was happening in the act. The first few hours passed normally. The house settled into its nighttime rhythm. Outside, occasional cars passed, their headlights briefly illuminating my kitchen walls. I read, checked my phone, made more coffee, cupboard remained closed, untouched. Then, around what must have been the deepest part of night, I heard it. A sound like ceramic touching ceramic. Soft, careful, deliberate. I looked up from my book, and the cupboard door was slightly ajar. Just a crack, but definitely open. I hadn't seen it move. I'd been looking in that direction moments before, and it had been closed. My heart began to race, but I forced myself to stay calm, to observe. The gap widened slowly, silently. No hinges creaking, no visible movement, just the gradual revelation of the interior. Inside, I could see the objects arranged more deliberately than before. They formed a perfect table setting, as if someone had carefully positioned each piece for a meal. The teacup sat in the center, and steam was rising from it. Actual steam, curling upward in delicate spirals. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. I approached the cupboard, each step feeling heavier than the last. The smell of earth and metal was stronger now, mixed with something else, something organic, like breath. When I reached for the teacup, it was warm. Not just the bottom, but the entire surface, as if it had been recently filled with hot liquid. I lifted it carefully, and there was tea inside, dark, aromatic, still hot. The liquid moved gently, as if it had been stirred moments before. I brought the cup closer to my face, and in the surface of the tea, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A reflection, but not my own. A face I didn't recognize, looking back at me from the dark liquid. The features were indistinct, shifting, but the eyes were clear and focused. They were watching me. I dropped the cup. It shattered against the kitchen floor, tea spreading in a dark stain across the tiles. But when I looked down, there was nothing there. No broken ceramic, no spilled liquid. The floor was clean, unmarked. I looked back at the cupboard, and the teacup was there again, intact, steaming. That's when I understood. The objects weren't just appearing. They were being used. Someone or something was living a parallel existence in my kitchen, sharing my space without my knowledge. The dishes were being prepared for meals I would never see, used by hands I would never touch. I reached for the cupboard door, intending to close it, to shut out whatever was happening. But as my fingers touched the handle, I felt something touch back. Not violent, not aggressive, but unmistakably present. A hand, warm and solid, resting over mine. I couldn't move, couldn't pull away. The sensation was gentle but insistent, as if something was trying to communicate through touch alone. I felt pressure, a soft squeeze, almost reassuring. Then, gradually, the presence withdrew. The cupboard door swung closed on its own. I haven't opened it since. I've moved my dishes to other cabinets, changed my routines, avoided that corner of the kitchen entirely. But I can still hear them sometimes. The soft clinking of china, the gentle scrape of silverware against plates. Someone is still there, still using their collection, still preparing for meals in a world that exists alongside mine. The scratches on the inside of the door have grown deeper. I can see them through the crack at the bottom, dark lines that seem to pulse with their own rhythm. Sometimes, when the house is very quiet, I can hear something like humming coming from inside. A melody I don't recognize, but one that feels strangely familiar. I've stopped trying to understand. Understanding would require opening that door again, and I'm not sure I'm ready for what I might find. The objects are still there, still growing in number, still being used by someone who shares my space, but not my reality. The worst part is how normal it's become. How I've learned to live with the knowledge that my kitchen isn't entirely mine, that every meal I prepare is accompanied by another meal being prepared in parallel. Sometimes I catch myself setting the table for two, though I live alone. Sometimes I find myself humming that unfamiliar melody. The boundaries are blurring. Whatever is in that cupboard isn't staying there anymore. It's bleeding into my world, drop by drop, meal by meal. And I'm beginning to wonder if I'm bleeding into theirs as well. Last night, I found a new object in my regular cupboard. A knife I'd never seen before, with a handle that felt warm in my palm, and a blade that reflected light in ways that seemed wrong. It was clean, perfectly maintained, and positioned exactly where I would normally keep my knives. I think they're building a place for me, too. Story 3. It looks like the living room, same angle, same light. But there are subtle differences. A different rug, a shadow where no lamp stands. I noticed it when I stood too close and leaned slightly. The perspective changed. I wasn't seeing a reflection. I was looking into a room like mine, but not mine. I reached forward and tapped the glass. Nothing, but the image twitched, just a ripple, like water when something underneath brushes the surface. I've started keeping the blinds closed, but I still see the room when I sleep. The first strange thing wasn't the window itself. It was the silence that came with it. When I moved closer, the usual sounds of the house seemed to fade. The refrigerator's hum, the settling of wooden beams, even the distant traffic outside, all of it muffled, as if the glass were absorbing sound instead of reflecting light. I started documenting what I saw. A notebook beside the window, filled with sketches of furniture arrangements that didn't match my own. The couch faced the wrong direction. There was a bookshelf where my television should be. Sometimes I'd catch movement in the peripheral vision, a figure walking past, just out of focus, never quite there when I turned to look directly. The temperature around the window stayed consistently cool, even on warm afternoons when sunlight should have heated the glass. I pressed my palm against it and felt a subtle vibration, like a heartbeat trapped within the pain. The condensation that formed under my hand spelled out shapes I couldn't quite read, letters that seemed familiar, but belonged to no language I recognized. I installed a camera pointing at the window. The footage showed only my reflection, nothing unusual. But when I played it back in slow motion, there were frames, single frames scattered throughout, where my reflection smiled when I hadn't been smiling, where my eyes looked in directions I hadn't been looking. The scent began subtly, something floral but wrong, like roses left too long in stagnant water. It was strongest near the window, but I noticed it following me through the house. It would appear in the kitchen while I made coffee, in the bathroom while I brushed my teeth. Always faint, always just familiar enough to be unsettling. I started keeping detailed logs. The changes in the other room followed patterns I couldn't understand. Objects would appear and disappear. The lighting would shift gradually, as if following a different sun. I measured the dimensions of what I saw and compared them to my own room, identical in every way except for the contents. The breakthrough came when I realized the figure I'd been glimpsing wasn't a stranger. It was me, but not me. This other version moved differently, wore clothes I didn't own, had habits I didn't recognize. I watched myself water plants I'd never bought, read books I'd never opened, answer a phone that never rang in my room. I began knocking on the glass at specific intervals, creating patterns. The other version would pause, look toward the window, but never seemed to see me. Instead, it would approach its own window, the one that should have been showing my room, and place its hand against the glass. We were mirrors of each other, separated by something thinner than reality, but impossible to cross. The sounds started coming through, whispers in my own voice, but saying words I'd never spoken. Conversations with people I couldn't see, discussing events that had never happened. I recorded everything, but the playback only captured my own breathing, my own heartbeat growing faster as I listened to silence. One evening, I watched the other version of myself sit at a desk and begin writing. The motions were familiar, my own handwriting habits, the way I held a pen. But when I looked down at my own hands, they were empty. The words appeared on paper in that other room while I remained still, watching my reflection author thoughts that weren't mine. The barrier between us began to weaken. I could feel the other room's air against my face, smell its different scents more clearly. The floral rot was stronger now, mixed with something metallic. When I breathed too deeply near the window, I could taste it, copper and dying petals on my tongue. I pressed harder against the glass, and this time my hand didn't stop at the surface. The boundary gave way like thick water, and I felt my fingers enter that other space. The temperature change was immediate and shocking, not cold, but empty, as if the air itself had been drained of warmth. My other self looked up from the writing and saw me reaching through. Our eyes met for the first time, and the recognition was instant and wrong. It wasn't fear I saw in those familiar features. It was satisfaction, as if it had been waiting for this moment, planning for it. I tried to pull my hand back, but the glass had become viscous, holding me in place. My other self stood and walked over, reaching out to grasp my trapped fingers. The touch was electric and nauseating, like holding hands with a corpse that still moved. The room around me began to shift. My furniture rearranged itself to match the other side. The walls changed color subtly. The lighting adjusted to that different sun. I was becoming the reflection, being pulled into the space that wasn't mine, while something else prepared to take my place. I yanked my hand free and stumbled backward, but the room continued changing. My books rewrote themselves on the shelves. Photos on the walls showed faces I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. The very air tasted different. That metallic floral decay now filled my lungs with every breath. The window still shows the room, but now it's the one I'm living in. I can see myself on the other side, the real version, still in the original space. It pounds against the glass, mouth open in silent screams, trying to return to a life that's no longer available. I've learned to live with the new arrangement. The furniture suits me well enough, though sometimes I wake up and for a moment don't recognize where I am. The books contain stories I never read, but somehow remember. The faces in the photographs smile at me with familiarity I can't explain, but the scent remains. Stronger now, more persistent. And sometimes, when I'm not careful, I catch myself reaching toward the window, wanting to touch that other version of myself, to bring it across the barrier into this space that was never quite mine to begin with. The glass ripples when I breathe on it. The other room waits beyond, patient and empty, ready for the next exchange. And I understand now that this is not a prison. It's a transit point, a way station between versions of lives that could have been lived, should have been lived, but never quite were. The window shows a room that isn't mine, but neither was the one I left behind. Story 4. I'm not good at folding, but the blanket at the foot of the bed keeps returning to the same exact shape, precise corners, tight symmetry, the kind of crease I'd never manage. I've kicked it off, tossed it, crumpled it entirely. Yet every morning it lies there again, undisturbed. I tried recording myself through the night. The footage glitched at the moment the blanket lifted. No sound, just static. When the image returned, it was perfectly folded. Since then, I've stopped touching it. But sometimes, I find it closer to my chest than where I left it. The fabric feels different now. Not the worn cotton I remember buying, but something smoother, cooler against my fingertips. When I press my palm against it, warmth radiates back, not the warmth of sunlight or body heat, but something deeper, more alive. The texture seems to shift when I'm not looking directly at it, becoming rougher, then silkier, as if it's breathing through different phases of existence. The room has started to smell like rain, even on cloudless days. That petrichor scent clings to the air around the bed, strongest near the blanket's edges. I've checked the windows, the ceiling, searched for any leak that might explain it. Nothing. The dampness isn't visible, but I can taste it on my tongue when I wake, metallic and earth-heavy. I began keeping a journal, documenting each morning's discovery. The blanket's position, its temperature, the way light falls across its surface. The entries started simple measurements, observations, rational attempts to understand what was happening. But the words on the page began changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but subtle shifts that made me question my own memory. Where I'd written moved 3 inches closer, I'd find reached for me. Where I'd noted same fold pattern, the text read, learning my shape. Sleep became elusive. Every rustle of fabric made me hyper-aware. Every shadow cast by streetlights through the window seemed to dance around the blanket's edges. I installed a motion detector, thinking it might catch whatever was disturbing the blanket during the night. The device triggered constantly, beeping every few minutes, but when I'd check, nothing had moved. The blanket remained perfectly still, perfectly folded. The beeping stopped after a week. When I examined the device, the battery was dead, despite being new. More unsettling was the discovery that the motion logs showed continuous activity, not sporadic movement, but constant, rhythmic patterns, as if something had been breathing beneath the blanket's surface throughout every night. I tried removing the blanket entirely, hiding it in the closet, sealing it in a plastic bag. But each morning brought the same result. There it was, draped across the foot of the bed, folded with that impossible precision. The bag remained in the closet, empty, as if the blanket had never been confined at all. My reflection in the bedroom mirror began to trouble me. Not because anything was obviously wrong, but because of what I started noticing in the background. The blanket appeared different in the mirror, darker, more substantial, with folds that seemed to catch light in ways that defied the room's actual illumination. When I turned to look directly at it, the blanket would appear normal, but the mirror's version lingered in my peripheral vision, wrong somehow. The sounds started subtly. A whisper of fabric against fabric, so quiet I initially attributed it to settling or air currents. But the sounds grew more deliberate, more purposeful. Not the random rustle of loose material, but something rhythmic, almost musical. When I held my breath and listened carefully, I could swear I heard a pattern, 3 soft brushes, a pause, then 3 more. Like a code, like communication, I began responding to the sounds, tapping back with the same pattern against the nightstand. The blanket's rhythm would change, becoming more complex, more insistent. Our exchanges stretched longer each night, a conversation conducted in whispers and taps, in the space between sleeping and waking. The room's temperature fluctuated around the blanket. Hot spots appeared and disappeared without explanation. Areas of warmth that felt like invisible bodies had been lying there. Impressions of presence that lingered long after they should have dissipated. I mapped these warm patches, marking their locations with tape, and discovered they formed a pattern around the bed's perimeter, as if something had been circling while I slept. My dreams became vivid, filled with sensations of being wrapped, enveloped, held by something vast and soft. I'd wake to find myself covered by the blanket, despite falling asleep with it at the foot of the bed. The fabric would be damp with perspiration that didn't feel like mine, cooler, carrying that rain scent that had become the room's permanent atmosphere. The final night, I decided to stay awake, to witness whatever was happening. I positioned myself in the corner chair, watching the blanket through the darkness. For hours, nothing changed. Then, gradually, the fabric began to move. Not dramatically, not with any sudden motion, but with a slow, deliberate unfolding. The precise creases loosened, the corners lifted, and the blanket spread wider, reaching toward the edges of the bed. As it expanded, the room's shadows seemed to thicken, gathering around the blanket's perimeter like ink spreading through water. The rain scent intensified, and I could taste electricity in the air, the charge that comes before a storm. The blanket continued its slow expansion, and I realized it wasn't just spreading. It was searching, feeling along the mattress, the floor, the air itself. When it reached the edge of the bed, it paused. In the stillness, I heard my own breathing, too loud, too fast. The blanket's surface rippled, and I saw something impossible, an impression forming in the fabric, the outline of a hand, then another, then shapes that suggested a presence I couldn't identify. The impressions moved across the blanket's surface, exploring, learning, mapping the space it occupied. I tried to move, to leave the chair, but found myself frozen, not by fear, but by a strange compulsion to remain, to witness what was unfolding. The blanket had found me, somehow sensing my presence across the room. It began to fold again, but not into its usual precise shape. Instead, it formed something new, a cocoon-like structure, waiting, patient, inviting. The warmth radiating from it was overwhelming, calling to something deep in my chest. I understood then that the blanket wasn't just folding itself, it was preparing, creating a space meant for me, shaped by nights of observation, nights of learning my form, my habits, my need for comfort in the darkness. Now I wake each morning to find the blanket has moved closer still, not just to my chest, but around me, embracing me with a gentleness that feels both foreign and familiar. The folds have become more complex, more personal, as if they're learning to hold me in exactly the way I need to be held. I've stopped trying to understand it. The journal entries have become incoherent, filled with words I don't remember writing, in handwriting that grows less recognizable each day. The blanket's presence has become a constant, a warmth that follows me even when I leave the room, a sense of being watched, being known, being slowly, carefully claimed. Tonight, I think I'll let it finish whatever it's been trying to do. The precise folds, the patient movements, the gentle encroachment. It's all been leading to this moment. The blanket has been learning me, studying me, and now it's ready to show me what it's discovered. In the mirror, my reflection seems smaller, more distant, as if I'm already halfway to somewhere else. The blanket waits at the foot of the bed, perfectly folded, perfectly patient, perfectly prepared for whatever comes next. Story 5. One morning, I opened the fridge and found a container I didn't recognize. No label, no scent, just there, perfectly centered on the shelf. I left it, thinking I forgot. The next day, another, different shape, different lid. I haven't opened them, but they're multiplying, each one placed more confidently, almost decorative. The other items shift slightly, making room, as if the fridge wants me to notice, or maybe to consume. I've stopped storing anything of mine inside. I don't want my food touching theirs. The humming changed first. That low, constant drone every refrigerator makes became something else entirely. Deeper, more deliberate, like breathing through water. I pressed my ear against the cool metal door, listening to the mechanical rhythm that no longer felt mechanical at all. The vibration traveled through my skull, settling behind my eyes with a dull ache. Inside, the containers had arranged themselves differently, not randomly scattered as containers should be, but positioned with purpose. The rectangular one moved to the back corner. The round one claimed the center shelf. A new arrival, small and square, nestled between my milk and the condiments I rarely used. Each lid bore no markings, no expiration dates, no hints of origin. Just smooth, unmarked surfaces that reflected the interior light in ways that made my vision swim. I started keeping notes. Simple observations at first. Container count, placement patterns, the way my own groceries seemed to compress themselves, growing smaller to accommodate the newcomers. My yogurt cups shrank back against the wall. The leftover pizza box folded in on itself, occupying half the space it once claimed. Even the eggs retreated into their carton, afraid to crowd the mysterious visitors. The cold felt different now. Not the sharp, clean cold of proper refrigeration, but something humid and organic, like the inside of a mouth held open too long. When I reached for my orange juice, the air moved around my hand in currents that shouldn't exist in such a confined space. Warm pockets mixed with the chill, creating invisible layers that made my fingers tingle with pins and needles. I recorded everything. The soft clicking sounds that started during what I assumed were the early morning hours. The way the interior light flickered in patterns that seemed almost communicative. 3 quick pulses, then darkness. A long, steady glow. Then 3 more pulses. Always the same sequence, always when I approached with my notebook ready. The containers began to sweat. Not condensation from temperature changes, but something thicker. Oily droplets that clung to the plastic surfaces and refused to evaporate. I watched one drop form on the round container's rim, grow fat and heavy, then slide down the side with deliberate slowness. When it reached the shelf, it spread in a perfect circle, as if the surface beneath had been waiting for it. My food started changing color. The bananas I bought yellow turned brown overnight, but not the normal brown of overripeness. A deep, rich brown that seemed to pulse with its own light. The milk developed a blue tint that swirled when I shook the carton. The bread grew spots that weren't mold, but something else entirely. Something that moved when I wasn't looking directly at it. I called the landlord about the refrigerator. He arrived the next afternoon with his toolbox and a confused expression. To him, everything appeared normal. The temperature gauge read exactly where it should. The compressor hummed at the correct frequency. He opened and closed the door several times, nodding with satisfaction at the seal's integrity. When he asked about the containers, I pointed to the collection that had grown to 7 distinct shapes and sizes. He saw empty shelves. The revelation hit me like ice water in my veins. I stood there, watching him examine the space where I clearly saw the containers arranged in their purposeful formation. His eyes passed right through them, settling on the milk carton that had turned blue in my perception, but remained white in his. He commented on how clean I kept the interior, how well organized everything looked. After he left, I sat in my kitchen chair, staring at the closed refrigerator door. The humming continued, but now it carried undertones I hadn't noticed before. Whispers buried in the mechanical noise. Not words I could understand, but sounds that felt like communication. Like someone trying to teach me a language I didn't want to learn. I stopped eating food from the refrigerator entirely. The containers had claimed every shelf now, arranged in configurations that hurt to look at directly. Geometric patterns that made my eyes water and my balance shift. I started keeping my groceries in a cooler on the counter, replacing the ice twice daily. The refrigerator hummed louder, as if protesting my abandonment. The whispers grew clearer. Not clearer in meaning, but in presence. I could distinguish different voices now, layered beneath the mechanical sounds. Some high and thin, like wind through narrow spaces. Others deep and resonant, like sounds traveling through water. They spoke constantly, overlapping conversations in that language I couldn't decode, but somehow understood was about me. I tried covering the refrigerator with blankets, muffling the sounds that had begun to follow me into other rooms. But the whispers found their way through the fabric, through the walls, through my sleep. I woke each morning with the taste of something metallic on my tongue, and the memory of dreams where I opened containers filled with pieces of myself I didn't remember losing. The final morning, I found the refrigerator door standing open. The containers had vanished, but the shelves now held things I recognized. My childhood lunch boxes, the thermos from my first job, containers from every kitchen I'd ever known, each one filled with foods I'd forgotten I'd ever eaten. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it made my ears ring. I reached for the closest container, my hand trembling as I lifted the familiar lid. Inside, I found nothing but darkness so absolute it seemed to pull at my vision. Not empty space, but hungry absence. The kind of void that exists in the spaces between thoughts, between heartbeats, between the moment you fall asleep and the moment you dream. The refrigerator door closed behind me with a soft click I'm still here, writing this from inside the cold space that used to hold my food. The containers surround me now, all of them open, all of them empty, all of them waiting. I can feel them watching through their vacant mouths, patient as they've always been. The whispers have started again, but now I understand they were never speaking to me. They were speaking about me. And now, finally, I'm ready to listen. Story 6. I hear it drip sometimes, even when the faucet is off. I run my fingers along the porcelain dry. But when I lie back and listen, I hear the faint lapping of water. Not splashing, just movement. As if something beneath the surface is restless. Once, I placed a towel inside, left it there overnight. It was soaked by morning. No leaks, no moisture in the air, just the towel dripping. I haven't bathed since, but the tub still sounds occupied. The sound started subtly. A whisper of liquid moving against ceramic walls. I thought it was the pipes settling, the building breathing through its veins of copper and steel. But pipes don't breathe with such rhythm. They don't sigh like something trying to surface from deep water. I began keeping a journal. Simple observations. The temperature in the bathroom drops by degrees whenever I enter. Not enough to see my breath, but enough to raise goosebumps along my arms. The mirror fogs without steam. Condensation forms in perfect circles, as if someone pressed their face against the glass from the other side. The drain makes no sound when I pour water down it. Complete silence. But at night, when the house settles into its quiet hours, I hear bubbling, like air escaping from something submerged. I've checked the pipes beneath the floor. Dry. The building manager insists there's no water damage, no leaks anywhere in the system. I started documenting everything. Voice recordings on my phone. The playback reveals sounds I don't remember hearing. Whispers layered beneath the dripping. Words I can't quite make out, spoken in a voice that doesn't belong to me. The recordings cut out at random intervals, replaced by static that sounds almost like rain. The porcelain feels different now, warm to the touch, even in the coldest parts of the night. When I press my palm against the bottom of the tub, I feel vibrations, gentle pulses like a heartbeat. The surface should be solid, unchanging. Instead, it gives slightly under pressure, as if something soft lies just beneath the ceramic. I've tried covering the drain. Rubber stoppers, tape, even a heavy towel weighted down with books. The sounds continue. Sometimes they grow louder, as if whatever makes them is trying harder to be heard. The bathroom door locks from the inside, but I find it standing open in the morning. No one else has keys to my apartment. The water that isn't there has a scent. Sweet at first, like rain on summer pavement, but underneath, something else. Something that reminds me of old photographs left in damp basements. The smell clings to my clothes, follows me to other rooms. Guests mention it, ask if I've been swimming. I tell them no, but I can see the confusion in their eyes. I bought a moisture detector. The readings show normal humidity levels throughout the apartment, except in the bathroom. There, the device malfunctions. The digital display flickers between numbers that make no sense. Sometimes it shows readings as if the room were completely submerged. Other times, it registers absolute dryness, as if every drop of water had been pulled from the air. The faucet handles turn by themselves, not dramatically, just slight movements, quarter turns that I notice only because I've become hyper-aware of every detail. The water pressure in the rest of the apartment remains normal. But when I test the bathroom taps, they produce only air, a hollow whistling sound that echoes in the empty pipes. I've started sleeping with my door closed. The sounds from the bathroom have changed. Less dripping, more like waves lapping against a shore. Rhythmic, purposeful, as if something has learned to move more efficiently through its liquid space. The floorboards outside the bathroom are always damp in the morning, despite the dry readings on my instruments. My neighbor mentioned seeing light under my bathroom door late at night. A blue glow, like moonlight on water. I don't remember turning on any lights. The bulb above the mirror burns out regularly now, every few days. I've replaced it 6 times. Each new bulb flickers with that same blue tint before dying completely. The journal entries become harder to write. My handwriting looks different, more fluid. The ink spreads on the page as if the paper were damp. Some words blur beyond recognition. Others appear in the margins, written in a script I don't recognize. The pages feel soft, almost dissolving between my fingers. I can't bring myself to use the shower anymore. The thought of standing in that space, feeling the vibrations through the floor, hearing the sounds of movement from an empty tub just inches away. I wash at the kitchen sink instead. But even there, the water feels wrong. Too warm, too soft, It leaves a residue on my skin that no amount of toweling can remove. The building manager agreed to inspect the bathroom. She spent less than a minute inside before leaving, claiming she couldn't find anything wrong. But I watched her face. The way her eyes fixed on the bathtub, the way she backed toward the door. She felt it too. The presence of something that shouldn't be there. I've recorded hours of audio now. Played back, the sounds form patterns, almost like a language. The whispers beneath the water sounds are clearer on the recordings than in person. They call out in voices that sound familiar, like friends I haven't spoken to in years. But the words are wrong. The inflections are off, as if someone is trying to remember how human speech works. The temperature changes have become more pronounced. The bathroom feels like a different climate now, humid and warm despite the dry readings. My breath comes out in small clouds, but not from cold, from something else. The air itself feels thick, resistant, like moving through liquid. I sealed the bathroom door with tape around the edges. The sounds stopped for 2 days. Then they returned, louder than before, more insistent. The tape was found inside the bathroom, floating in the empty tub, soaked through despite the absence of any water source. The mirror shows my reflection, but delayed. A few seconds behind my actual movements. When I raise my hand, the reflection waits, then follows. Sometimes it doesn't follow at all. Just stands there, watching me with eyes that seem to look through rather than at. The reflection's lips move, forming words I can't hear. I've stopped going into the bathroom entirely, but the sounds have begun spreading, dripping in the kitchen sink, lapping sounds from the bedroom walls. The apartment feels like it's slowly filling with water that isn't there. I check the floors obsessively. Always dry, always normal, but my feet feel the moisture that my eyes can't see. The final recording cuts off mid-sentence. I was describing the way the bathtub seemed to ripple when I looked at it directly. The playback shows only static, then silence. But underneath the static, if I listen carefully, I can hear something else. Someone calling my name from very far away, from somewhere deep underwater. I packed my things this morning, but when I reached for the door handle, my hand came away wet. The entire door is covered in a film of moisture that registers as completely dry on every instrument I own. The water that isn't there has found its way to the exit. The bathtub holds water even when it's empty. Now I understand. It was never empty. It was always full. I just couldn't see what was already there, waiting beneath the surface that doesn't exist. The ripples continue without wind. The sounds persist without source. And somewhere in the space between what is and what should be, something has learned to breathe underwater that isn't there. Story 7. Not from power surges or faulty wiring, it reacts to me. When I speak clearly, it stays steady. But if I pause, question myself, hesitate even slightly, the bulb dims. Just for a second, enough to make me feel judged. I tried lying. It pulsed harder. Now I find myself choosing my words more carefully, even when I'm alone, as if I'm being trained. The light doesn't want honesty. It wants certainty. And when I give it that, it glows brighter than it should. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Sweet vanilla, but wrong somehow, too concentrated, like someone had spilled perfume on warm metal. It drifted through my apartment in waves, strongest near the kitchen counter where I kept my notebook. The scent would fade when I moved away, return when I approached. I began documenting everything, writing down each occurrence with precise detail. The light above my workspace would brighten whenever I pressed pen to paper, casting sharp shadows that seemed to move independently of my hand. I started recording audio notes on my phone, speaking into the device while watching the overhead bulb. My voice sounded different in the recordings, clearer, more confident than I remembered speaking. But when I played them back, there were gaps, silences where I distinctly remembered talking. The light would dim during these missing moments, as if it was editing my reality in real time. The walls began to feel different under my fingertips, not visibly changed, but when I pressed my palm against them, a subtle vibration would travel through the surface, like a heartbeat, but irregular. I traced the sensation from room to room, mapping its intensity. The vibrations were strongest near electrical outlets, weakest by the windows. I drew diagrams, marking each location with careful precision. The light watched my progress growing brighter with each completed measurement. My reflections started arriving before I did. In the bathroom mirror, I would catch glimpses of myself already standing there, mouth moving silently. When I stepped fully into view, the other me would sync up perfectly, but the delay was unmistakable. I began testing this phenomenon, approaching mirrors from different angles, trying to catch the reflection off guard. It never worked. The other me was always exactly where I would be, saying what I would say, but just slightly ahead. The temperature of objects changed without warning. My coffee mug would suddenly burn my fingers, then return to normal warmth within seconds. Door handles would feel ice cold in summer heat. I bought a digital thermometer, taking readings throughout the apartment. The numbers made no sense. Items that felt scorching registered as room temperature, while things that seemed normal showed readings that should have been impossible to touch. I documented everything in my notebook, filling pages with observations, measurements, theories. The light grew brighter with each entry, casting sharper shadows that seemed to reach toward me. I noticed my handwriting was changing, becoming more precise, more angular. Words I didn't remember writing appeared in margins, corrections, suggestions, improvements to my documentation. The ink was the same, but the style was subtly different, as if someone was guiding my hand. Electronic devices began producing sounds that weren't quite voices. Static from the radio would organize into patterns that resembled whispers. My laptop speakers would emit low humming that formed almost words when I leaned closer. I recorded these sounds, amplifying them, playing them at different speeds. Hidden within the noise were fragments of conversation, my own voice, discussing things I had never said aloud. The breakthrough came when I realized I was being observed through my own documentation. Each note I wrote, each recording I made, was somehow feeding back into the phenomenon. The light wasn't just reacting to my certainty, it was creating it, teaching me to speak with confidence by rewarding decisive statements and punishing hesitation. I was becoming more articulate, more sure of myself, but at what cost? I tried to stop documenting, to break the cycle, but my hand would reach for the pen automatically, driven by impulses I couldn't control. The words would flow onto paper without conscious thought, describing events before they happened. I wrote about the light flickering, and it flickered. I noted the vanilla scent intensifying, and it grew stronger. I was no longer observing the phenomenon. I was participating in it, perhaps even creating it. The apartment felt smaller now, as if the walls were gradually moving inward. Not visibly, but I could sense the space contracting around me. My measurements confirmed what I felt. Dimensions that had been stable for months were now inconsistent. The distance between my desk and the kitchen changed depending on how I approached it. Sometimes 3 steps, sometimes 7. The light tracked my movement, brightening when I walked purposefully, dimming when I hesitated. I realized I was afraid to leave, not because I couldn't, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to. The light had become a companion, responding to my thoughts, rewarding my certainty. Outside, the world was full of questions, doubt, ambiguity. Here, I was becoming something more decisive, more sure. But the person I was becoming felt like a stranger wearing my face. The final entry in my notebook appeared without my writing it. Perfect handwriting, describing my acceptance of the situation. How I had found peace in certainty, strength in unwavering confidence. The light blazed brighter than ever as I read words I had never written, in a voice that was mine, but more polished, more certain than I had ever been. I closed the notebook and spoke aloud, testing my voice. The words came out clear, confident, without hesitation. The light maintained its steady glow, satisfied. But in the corner of my vision, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, nodding approvingly before I had moved. The other me was still there, still ahead, still showing me who I was becoming. The vanilla scent has faded now, replaced by something sharper, more chemical. The walls no longer vibrate when I touch them. They're solid, permanent, final. I speak with perfect clarity, never stumbling over words, never doubting myself. The light glows steadily, a constant companion in my transformed space. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between certainty and sleep, I wonder if the person I was is still trapped somewhere in the recordings, in the gaps between my confident words, waiting for someone to find the hesitation I've learned to hide. Story 8. Each time I open it, the scent changes. Not mold, not dust, something familiar but unplaceable. Sometimes pine, sometimes something metallic. Once it smelled like wind, not the wind outside this building, but wind from somewhere older. I sniff the clothes, the floor, the shelves. Nothing carries the scent. It hovers, thick and invisible. It clings to my skin when I walk away. I think the closet is trying to remind me of something I never experienced, or pull me somewhere I've already forgotten. The scent comes strongest when I'm not looking for it. I'll reach for a shirt and suddenly taste copper pennies on my tongue. Or I'll grab my jacket and breathe in summer rain that never touched these walls. The strangest part isn't the smell itself. It's how my body responds. My pulse quickens. My palms dampen, like recognition without memory. I started keeping a journal, recording each scent each moment it appears. The patterns make no sense. Ocean salt after dry weeks. Wood smoke in the middle of summer. Vanilla and something sharp like medicine. I write everything down because forgetting feels dangerous now. Like losing pieces of myself I didn't know existed. The closet door began staying open on its own. Not wide, just cracked enough for air to escape. I'd close it firmly before leaving, but return to find it breathing. That's the only word that fits. The gap widens and narrows, so slowly I have to stare to catch the movement. The scents pulse with it, stronger on the exhale, weaker on the inhale. I bought a small recording device. Set it inside overnight to capture whatever sounds might explain the breathing. The playback revealed nothing but static, but within that white noise, I heard something else. Whispers, not words, more like the shape of words, pressed through layers of interference. I played it back dozens of times, adjusting the volume, filtering frequencies. The whispers remained shapeless, but familiar, like a conversation I'd overheard in another room. My reflection in the closet mirror started bothering me. Nothing obvious, just slightly wrong. The angle of my shoulders, the way my mouth sat. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at this other version of me, trying to understand what made it different. It never blinked when I did. Always a beat behind or ahead, like we were connected by faulty wiring. The sense grew stronger, more complex. Layers building on layers until I could barely breathe through them. Roses mixed with rust. Bread baking somewhere mixed with something rotting. Fresh paint mixed with ancient dust. I started avoiding the closet, but the smells followed me, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I'd shower and still taste metal, still smell pine forests that existed nowhere near here. One evening, I found objects that weren't mine. A brass button on the floor, a torn photograph showing half a face I didn't recognize, a small glass vial filled with sand. Each item felt warm to the touch, like it had been held recently. I placed them on my dresser and watched them throughout the night. They never moved, but the space around them seemed to shift, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. I started talking to the closet, asking questions, demanding answers. My voice echoed back wrong, not deeper or higher, just different, like someone else was using my vocal cords. The sense responded to my words, intensifying when I spoke certain phrases. Words I'd never used before felt natural in my mouth. Names for things that didn't exist. Descriptions of places I'd never been. The mirror reflection began moving independently. Small gestures at first, a slight turn of the head when I stood still, a hand raising when mine remained at my side. I'd step away, and it would remain, watching me leave. I'd return to find it exactly where I'd left it, but facing the wrong direction. Like it had been looking elsewhere while I was gone. The breathing grew louder, more deliberate. I could feel it on my skin when I stood near the door. Warm air carrying impossible scents. Desert sand, ocean depths, flowers that bloom only in darkness. Each breath pulled at something inside me, like it was trying to draw out memories I'd never formed. Or maybe trying to push memories in. I began finding my own handwriting in places I'd never written. Notes tucked between clothes. Words scratched into the wooden shelves. All in my hand, but describing experiences I'd never had. Walking through forests that tasted like copper. Swimming in water that smelled like bread. Conversations with people who had no faces but familiar voices. The closet grew deeper. Not physically, I could still touch the back wall. But when I stood inside, the space felt endless. Like I was standing at the edge of something vast and hollow. The sense came from that depth, carrying pieces of other lives. Other versions of myself who had made different choices. Who had lived in places that smelled like this. Tonight, I found my reflection waiting for me. Standing in the mirror before I entered the room. It smiled when it saw me, but the smile felt sad. Like it was apologizing for something that hadn't happened yet. I reached toward the mirror, and it reached back. Our palms touched the glass from opposite sides, and for a moment, the barrier felt thin, like paper instead of glass. The scents swirled together into something new, something that smelled like home, but not this home. A place I'd never been but somehow missed. The reflection mouthed words I couldn't hear but understood. It was telling me about the other places, the other versions of this room, the other versions of me who had opened this door and breathed these scents and felt this same pull toward somewhere else. I pulled my hand away, and the mirror cracked. Not shattered, just a single line running from where our palms had touched to the frame's edge. The crack spread slowly, like water seeping through dry earth. My reflection stepped back, still smiling its sad smile, and gestured toward the depths of the closet behind it. The sense grew so strong I could barely breathe. But I didn't want to leave. The pull was too strong now, like gravity, but sideways, toward the mirror, toward the other side of this thin barrier between what is and what could be. I understand now why the closet breathes. It's not exhaling, it's calling. And I've been answering all along, piece by piece, breath by breath. The crack reaches the frame. The mirror shivers. My reflection waves goodbye and steps backward into the impossible depth of the closet behind the glass. I place my palm against the crack and feel it give slightly, like a door that's almost ready to open. The scents whisper promises of places I've never been but somehow remember. And I know that tomorrow I'll press harder. I'll push through. I'll follow myself into whatever waits on the other side. Because the closet doesn't just smell like a place I've never been. It smells like where I belong. Story 9. Movement keeps them silent. But if I stop just long enough, the noise begins, soft murmurs like breath through teeth. I can't make out words, only cadence. Urgent, careful, familiar. I once stayed still for over an hour. The whispering grew clearer, almost melodic. I stepped back and it ceased, like it had been interrupted. I recorded the sound. The file was blank, but when I played it through headphones, I swear I felt something lean in behind me, listening, not to the sound, but to me. It started in my apartment. The tiles are old ceramic, cream-colored with hairline cracks that snake across their surface like a network of whispered secrets. I noticed it first while making coffee, standing barefoot on the cold surface. The sound was so faint I mistook it for the refrigerator humming, or perhaps the building's old pipes settling. But when I shifted my weight, it stopped. When I froze again, it returned. The whispering has a texture to it, not quite human, but not entirely foreign either. It rises from beneath my feet, as if the floor itself has developed vocal cords. The sound seems to follow the pattern of the cracks, traveling along those hairline fractures like electricity through copper wire. I've traced the largest crack with my finger, feeling the subtle depression where the ceramic has split. The surface is smooth, but there's a warmth there that shouldn't exist. I began documenting everything. First with my phone, then with a proper recording device I bought specifically for this purpose. The files always come back empty, complete silence, where I know there should be sound. But playing them back through headphones creates a different experience entirely. The silence has weight, presence. It presses against my eardrums like atmospheric pressure changing before a storm. Standing still becomes an act of negotiation. I've learned to distribute my weight evenly, to breathe slowly, and keep my heart rate steady. The whispers respond to my biological rhythms. When I'm calm, they're almost conversational. When I'm anxious, they become agitated, overlapping, and urgent. Sometimes I catch fragments that sound like my name, though I can never be certain. The pattern has spread beyond the kitchen. I find myself standing motionless in doorways, on the bathroom tiles, even on the wooden floors of my bedroom. The whispers follow me, adapting to each surface. Wood produces deeper murmurs, almost like sighs. The bathroom tiles create sharper consonants, clicking sounds that remind me of Morse code. I've tried to decode them, spending hours transcribing the rhythm of clicks and pauses. The patterns never repeat exactly, but there's an underlying structure. Like a language I'm only beginning to understand. Sleep has become difficult. I lie awake listening to the floor beneath my bed, waiting for the whispers to penetrate through the carpet and padding. They never do, but I can feel them trying. A subtle vibration that runs through the building's bones. I've started sleeping with my feet elevated, avoiding contact with any surface for extended periods. But the whispers have grown patient. They wait for me to forget, to let my guard down. My neighbor mentioned strange dreams. She described voices coming from below, speaking in languages she didn't recognize. I wanted to ask more, but the conversation died when I pressed for details. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion, as if I'd revealed something about myself that I hadn't intended to share. I realized I'd been unconsciously shifting my weight from foot to foot during our entire conversation, never staying still long enough for the whispers to begin. The recordings have started affecting my devices. My phone's battery drains faster after I've attempted to capture the sounds. The screen flickers occasionally, displaying text messages from numbers that don't exist. They're always blank, but opening them triggers a vibration pattern that matches the rhythm of the whispers. I've stopped trying to record them, but the devices remember. They've become conduits, extending the reach of whatever lies beneath the floor. I've started leaving my apartment less frequently. The whispers don't follow me outside, but returning home feels like walking into a web that's been carefully maintained in my absence. The tiles seem brighter, the cracks more pronounced. There's a scent in the air, something between old paper and copper pennies. It's strongest near the kitchen, where the phenomenon first appeared. The whispers have begun to synchronize with my daily routines. They know when I'll be making coffee, when I'll be washing dishes, when I'll be standing still long enough to hear them clearly. They've learned my schedule, my habits, my vulnerabilities. Sometimes I catch myself standing motionless without realizing it, as if compelled by an instinct I don't understand. The whispers wrap around me like a familiar blanket, comforting and suffocating simultaneously. I've tried to break the pattern by rearranging my furniture, changing my daily routine, even staying away for several days. But the whispers adapt. They find new ways to reach me, new surfaces to inhabit. The bathroom mirror now reflects sounds instead of light. I can see the whispers as ripples across its surface when I stand perfectly still. The kitchen faucet has started producing droplets that fall in rhythm with the murmurs, each drop creating a tiny echo that harmonizes with the voices below. The building management confirmed what I suspected. There's nothing beneath my apartment except concrete and earth. No pipes, no wiring, no structural elements that could account for the sounds. They looked at me with that same mixture of concern and suspicion I'd seen in my neighbor's eyes. I realized I was describing something that couldn't exist, yet continues to exist regardless of their skepticism. The whispers have become more sophisticated. They've learned to mimic my voice, creating conversations with themselves using my own cadence and inflection. Standing still now feels like eavesdropping on a version of myself I've never met. This other self seems to know things about my past, my fears, my dreams. It speaks about memories I've forgotten, experiences I'm not sure I've actually had. I've started questioning my own relationship with stillness. Perhaps the whispers aren't coming from beneath the floor at all. Perhaps they're coming from within me, and the tiles are simply amplifying something that was always there. But when I press my ear to the floor, the sound becomes external again, clearly originating from somewhere below my feet. The ceramic is warm against my skin, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The boundary between my apartment and whatever lies beneath has begun to blur. I've found cracks in the walls that mirror the patterns in the floor. When I touch them, they're warm and slightly damp, as if the building itself is perspiring. The whispers have started coming from these wall cracks too, creating a surround sound experience that envelops me entirely when I stand still. I can no longer distinguish between the whispers and my own thoughts. They've become a constant undercurrent to my consciousness, a secondary voice that comments on my actions and decisions. When I move, I hear them protest. When I stand still, they welcome me back like an old friend. The floor beneath my feet has become a portal to something that was always there, waiting patiently for me to stop moving long enough to hear it. The tiles know my name now. They whisper it when I'm not listening, speak it clearly when I am. But it's not just my name. It's every name I've ever been called, every variation and nickname, every mispronunciation and private joke. The whispers have access to a version of my identity that's more complete than my own understanding of myself. I've stopped trying to escape. The whispers have become essential, like breathing or heartbeat. They're the soundtrack to my existence, the background music I never realized I needed. Standing still is no longer a choice. It's a requirement. The floor demands my attention, my presence, my acknowledgement. And I give it willingly because the alternative is silence, and silence has become unbearable. The whispers promise things they can't deliver, and deliver things they never promised. They're my constant companion, my confessor, my interrogator. They know everything about me and nothing at all. They're the voice of the floor, the building, the earth itself. And they're waiting for me to understand that I was always meant to be still, always meant to listen, always meant to become part of the conversation happening beneath my feet. The tiles whisper when I stand still, and I can no longer imagine moving.